So you should have just watched a short video about overexploitation of fisheries. I just want to go through it a little bit. So it's been common in the commercial fishing industry. Often on the path to market collapse, the fish will decline in size. So we'll remove a lot of the older, larger fish as we're exploiting a resource. And as that resource starts to decline, the older ones, they might have a higher reproductive output, meaning that larger fish often produce more eggs as females. And so that can hurt their reproductive effort, and it often leads to only smaller fish being available. Top predators are often disproportionately targeted as well. This is just kind of a pictorial illustration. So this shows the big catch of the day in Key West on two different days. One is in 1957 and one is in 2007. And these are the biggest fish that people caught that day on for display. And you can see how large some of these fish, and this is a hammerhead shark, are as the big fish that were caught that day. And in 2007, you can see there's one larger shark, but everything else is not nearly as large. And it's amazing just how you can see the difference in what's left out there. A great example is the bluefin tuna. It's listed, the southern bluefin tuna is listed as critically endangered. And these are the high-end tuna that you'll find in sushi restaurants. So people are still eating them, even though they're critically endangered. But the maguro is this bluefin tuna. And low supply fuels demand high prices, which promotes further exploitation. So these are deep sea fish, but you can get a ton of money if you can catch one. And the sizes of our largest bluefin tuna that are being caught every year has gone way down because all the biggest ones have already been removed. And the biggest ones are often the oldest ones, so it takes a long time to get to be a big fish. So it's harder and harder for any of the fish to grow to the same large sizes that we used to have in the past. This shows catch in thousands of tons, and it's divided up by country. So you can see, obviously, Japan eats a lot more sushi than a lot of other countries, and Japan has had the highest catches of bluefin tuna, and you can see that they were highest in the 1960s, and they've gone way down, and this is what we've gotten in the 1990s and 2000s, is a fraction of what they were getting in the 1960s. Australia also was doing a lot of fishing of southern bluefin tuna, and you can see that their intake peaked around 1980 and has gone down and is low for the 90s and 2000s. Another classic example of overexploitation, a lot of people consider whales to be part of fisheries. They're not actually fish, obviously, they're mammals, but they're something that's harvested from the ocean. And they are a classic example of overexploitation. And we see that a lot of our large whales are currently endangered. This table shows numbers prior to whaling, and that's commercial whaling, not whaling by indigenous peoples, which has been going on for a very long time. And so you can see that, like blue whales, they estimate that there used to be 200,000 of them. Currently, there's somewhere between 10 and 25,000 of them. Other examples include things like the fin whales, where there used to be 475,000, now there are only 60,000. And there are lots of examples like this. Sperm whales, for example, they think there used to be over 1 million of them, and now they're about 300,000 to 400,000. And this is just a classic example of overexploitation. Interestingly, countries came together to try and deal with the problem of declining whales and came up with a international ban on whaling starting in 1985. And this shows the harvests of whales. This doesn't include illegal killings. This includes legal killings of whales since the 1985 ban. And you can see that Japan by far has the highest take of whales at an estimate of 20,000. Norway, I think, has recently stopped whaling, but it for a while was whaling since the ban. And you'll go down and you'll see some other countries as well. Interestingly, we have had some take of whales, and if you'll take a second to think about it, where do you think, or who do you think is taking whales in our country? It's primarily indigenous peoples that have always been whaling, as far as we know of, at least, and they think that those harvests are relatively sustainable. Japan has recently withdrawn from the International Whaling Commission. Its tagline has always been that it's taking whales for scientific purposes, but they do sell the meat in their country. You can eat whale meat if you go visit Japan. But they say that they're just using what they've already taken for scientific purposes. There's a lot of evidence to say that that's not actually true, and a lot of the whales they're taking are in international waters, and a lot of it has been illegal, but these numbers are the legal take. But now they're not going to be part of the International Whaling Commission, so we're not really sure how many whales they're going to be taking currently. This shows it by species and also by country. And so you can see that it is a lot fewer whales being taken than we did was historically occurred. And by species, you can see that the number of whales has come down dramatically. But a lot of these species are endangered now. This shows what Japan was hunting prior to their withdrawal from the International Whaling Commission. So a lot of them were birds whales, minke whales, and sei whales. Birds whales are of least concern, so potentially you could make an argument that you might be able to come up with a sustainable harvest of birds whales because they're currently not endangered. However, sei whales are endangered, and so it's hard to think of an argument that they should be taken. I also want to talk about, so we keep really good data on the fishing industry on the target species. So the target species are the one that they want and that they're going to sell. There are a lot of indirect effects of the fishing industry, and often these are the ones that have even larger impacts than the ones that we see on the target species. An important term to remember is bycatch, and these are the fish that are caught by accident, basically. If you're trawling a net, you don't just catch the things that you want to catch. You catch everything that fits in the mesh of that net. If it's smaller than the mesh of the net, it might make it out. But everything else is also captured. Same thing, like you might put a trap out, like a lobster trap. If you catch anything that's not the lobster that's going to be thrown back, often thrown back dead, that's bycatch. It's not intended, it's not being sold, but it's killed anyway. So examples of these include some fish that aren't desirable, skates, rays. You can get things like birds, dolphins, sea turtles, and crustaceans. It really depends on what the target for the fishing vessel is. Pretty much anything else that's caught is bycatch. And they're not counted in the harvest. So there are effects of fishing that we don't actually have great numbers on all the time. Almost all of them die in the nets or on the boat or shortly after being dumped overboard. They're often damaged and they may not be able to survive whatever damage they've sustained through the fishing process. There's a lot of places that have released guides to what fish you should be consuming um, because they're caught in a sustainable way. And so the Monterey Bay Aquarium has a guide like this. I believe this one is from Greenpeace, but it basically tells you fish that you can eat that are sustainable, ones that are sometimes sustainable, sometimes not, and ones that are definitely not sustainable. So you can see on this one, um, most tuna are considered to be um, unsustainable. You can see there's some of them in the maybe. There's a couple that are in the yes category, but you need to know what species of fish you're eating, and you need to know how it was caught a lot of times to be able to determine whether it is sustainably caught or not. Some fished some farmed fish can be farmed in a sustainable way, but not all of them are sustainable. We see particularly salmon in the Northwest that are farmed. That is not a sustainable option because a lot of times the salmon are placed near where the wild salmon are swimming by, and they often get attacked by parasites from the farmed fish that are affecting the wild fish that may be endangered or may have lower stocks. Also, a lot of the nutrients that come from farming fish, if they're farmed in the ocean, those can cause eutrophication in the area where they're being farmed. Fish that are farmed on land, like tilapia, are often much more sustainable because we can filter the water and pull the waste out. If they're farmed in the ocean, they're less likely to be a sustainable source. I also wanted to point out there's a really interesting article here about a study that was done looking at how well different fish and sushi are labeled. And basically, what they did was they went to different sushi restaurants around Los Angeles, and there are bits of DNA in all the pieces of fish. And so they ran genetic analyses to determine what species of fish they were and whether it matched what they were labeled on the menu. And they found that 47% of Los Angeles sushi was mislabeled. And so even if you try to do the right thing, unfortunately, there's misinformation out there, so it can be difficult to determine even what kind of fish you're eating. And they had trouble figuring out exactly where the mislabeling occurred, like whether it happened on the fishing vessels, whether it happened in the stores or the distributors or by the restaurants. And so this is a common thing that happens. All right. I also wanted to point out this talks about some different groups that are targeted for overexploitation. Things like primates, you might not think of, are often used for biomedical research, but they're also taken out for pets and zoos and private collections and things like that. Birds and reptiles are often overexploited, even though we don't eat them. Ornamental fish are another example, which was highlighted by the movie Finding Nemo. Reef corals, interestingly, some people that have really fancy saltwater aquariums want unique corals, and so that can lead to reefs being destructively harvested from. Orchids, I mentioned before, and cacti. A lot of people like to keep cacti, and they get traded a lot on international markets as well. So overharvesting is not restricted to local markets. I mentioned earlier how globalization affects that. The international market is I cannot talk today, is estimated to be greater than $10 billion a year, not including edible fish. So edible fish is a whole nother set of markets that's worth quite a bit of money. And the source of a lot of these is the developing world and the tropics. And Part of this has to do with poverty in these areas, so there's a high economic incentive to overharvesting if you're already living in poor conditions. A lot of times the laws aren't enforced very well. They may not have good laws. The laws may just not be well enforced. The destination of a lot of this overharvesting is the developed world and East Asia. And there are some large multinational corporations that pay for the rights to certain resources that facilitate some of this overexploitation. Globalization, as I mentioned before, is a key driver. It allows resources to be exploited in one part of the world and be shipped to other places easily. It connects markets in a way that allows more overexploitation than we would have without globalization.